to another episode of Café Negro Show. I am your host, George.
And I am Adriana.
And on today's episode, we want to start by saying Happy Mother's Day to my mother, and of course, to this beautiful lady right here, Adriana, who gave me my daughter and my son. And now we have a beautiful family. Thank you so much. Happy Mother's Day to you all, ladies.
Thank you. Happy Mother's Day also, from me, to my mom and just to all the moms out there. I hope your day is so special and that you are treated like a queen, and that you just enjoy that time with your loved ones.
All right. So today is a very, very important episode. We're going to dive into the Word. So anything that's going to be said is going to be even 10 times more important because it's not going to be our word. It's going to be the Word of God. So let's get to it.
Yeah, so today we're going to go to the book of John. We're going to go to chapter 13 and we're going to read from verses 1 through 17. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I do as I have done for you. I set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them."
What a powerful, powerful chapter. And we didn't read the whole thing, but I'm sure there's so much that can be said about this. In our case, we wanted to discuss a little bit of the pointers the message that we received reading this word. In my case, it all started with verse 7, which says, Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." So in this story, we see it's right before Passover. Jesus is gathered with the disciples. And then all of a sudden, it's so descriptive, right? I could see him, putting on the towel on his waist and getting on his knees. And obviously, it's a very humbling position that Jesus puts himself in. And I can see where Peter comes from. I think he comes from a great heart as that honoring and respect that you have for God. And you just think, how are you going to clean my feet? You're Jesus, the Son of God, But the message that I understood, and this is something that can help us in everyday life, is how to honor and respect your brother, your sister, your neighbor. That pride, right? We live in a time where pride seems to be glorified. Everything you see, every store, the shirts, everything says pride. But if you think about it, the Bible calls that a sin. And here, God is showing us an example of humbleness. And he is Jesus, he is Lord, and he went down to clean his feet. And Peter, knowing that, was refusing. He said, no, you're not going to clean my feet. How dare you? But then Jesus explains to him, he's like, listen, this is necessary. I'm trying to teach you something. Life is like that. So many things that go on. Sometimes we really don't understand what God is trying to show us. But we have to be humble enough to just respect that God knows what's going on.
Yes. I see from that. That's a great point. I see Jesus kind of saying, like, you know, my understanding is not your understanding, right? Or like man's understanding. So it's like you don't see what I'm doing now. You may not understand it, but there's a greater purpose. I feel like that's like initially like what he was like trying to tell Peter. Hey, look, like this looks strange. You know, it may look strange to you, but I'm trying to teach you something. So, you know, even though it looks strange, just go with it because I'm gonna have a, you know, there's a teaching behind this. And then in verse 8 it says, even after Jesus says that, Peter says no. He says, no, you shall never wash my feet. And I feel like that's such like a human just response, right? When Jesus tells us something, we're like, still no. I'm just gonna just say the opposite of what you said. You're not going to wash my feet. And Jesus had to be even more detailed, which I feel like sometimes Jesus has to be with us because our understanding is not his understanding. And he says, unless I wash you, you have no part of me. You know, like he had to be.
He had to be a little more direct.
Yes.
And it's almost sad because like Peter was genuinely thinking that he's like, no, like I respect you so much, you know. So when he was saying no, it wasn't like a no that like most of us say no when it's something that we want to do, but God says no. This was more like a honorable no, like no, how could I won't let you clean my feet. But even like that, like you said, sometimes because we don't have the same understanding, we try to think by our understanding, and sometimes in our own understanding we think we're doing good by saying, no, I'm not going to do that. Lord, how can I, you know, but no. Yeah. I'm teaching you something. And God was very direct. He's like, listen, you're going to have no part with me if you don't go through this process. What a powerful message. Yeah. I mean, when I've seen this story, and I know we got so much more to say, it reminds me of the pastor that's cleaning the bathroom.
Oh, yes.
It's just, I see it so clear in my lifetime, you know. So many times my dad, he's a pastor, and a couple of the pastors that I've met that are very humble, you know. These are guys that are and shout out to Pastor Hector Rivera, actually, that's just a little side note, but these are pastors that have the blessing to preach a word in front of thousands of people on a weekly basis. They have a lot of influence. People that could easily get lost in that environment and just lose themselves and be a different type of person. But when you see them serving, like I said, clean the bathroom, doing the parking, doing like it's Jesus-like.
Yes, definitely. And this chapter, well, the verses that we read show us so many things, right? And like even in the beginning, where it says, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. So from the first few verses, I feel like he's trying to let us know, like Jesus loves us, like right from the beginning to the very end, like his infinite love. I feel like that's like the first thing that I grab from this. I think about that.
That's
like,
so good.
So it's like he's showing you love by doing this, by washing, like, you know, like the disciples' feet. So I felt like that really touched me. I'm like, God is, his love for us is so infinite. And then what you were saying, right? I feel like this chapter also shows us like leadership versus in service, right? So we definitely like see like it's so different. We see somebody in leadership, well, they shouldn't be doing this because they're the leaders, but Jesus shows us that's not the case.
Einstein, what do you think about serving? He's very distracted today, but what a wonderful verse. So as we kept on going on the verse, what was the next verse we discussed? I think it was 13. You could read it for us.
You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet.
That's another lesson right there. Mm-hmm. And that's what we were talking about, you know, just being humble enough. You know, the other day in church, one of the pastors said a line that just blew my mind. He's like, I want to make God so famous that I disappear. actually sure it wasn't like that.
No.
But it was something along those. I mean,
Interesting.
it's something along those lines because he was gonna worship, and he's like, my intention is that I present God so much that people don't even see me. Like that's the idea, And so when like you were talking about at the beginning, it's so cool because Jesus has gone through an amazing journey with the disciples, right? And this is towards the end. And I remember in the beginning, like in many things in our lives, in a lot of organizations and this and that, sometimes even in relationships, at the beginning, everything's kind of like everybody's all in, everybody's humble, we're all equals, you're my friend, everybody's like a little extra nice. But then imagine being Jesus and then you're hanging out with all your friends and then all of a sudden, some time passes and then Jesus has done all these amazing miracles, all this, I mean, easily he could talk to them a different way, kind of like, listen, we're not the same, but he shows them, like you said, from the beginning to the end, even having gone through all this amazing journey, he's still Jesus, he's still, humble and shows them, and then not only that, but commands them to be the same way.
Yes, and on that note, I think that on verse 10, Jesus is so uplifting. I feel like with when Peter was having this discussion with him, I'm sure that was not a great moment for Peter when Jesus no, and he has to be direct in the conversation. But I'm sure he didn't feel good about that, I mean, after he's like, oh yes, you can wash everything in my head, but I just feel like having that, he probably felt, well, maybe I'm not as close to you as I don't know you that well. But Jesus is just uplifting. And in verse 10, he says, and you are clean, as like talking to all the disciples, though not every one of you. So he reminds them. I know he's talking about Judas, that he's not the, he talks about that he was, the one that was supposed to betray him, right? But he wasn't specific. Think about it. He knew that Judas was sitting at the table and was going to betray him, but he still did that for him, knowing that he was going to betray him.
That's so good.
Oh, God.
Sorry, yes. Correct.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a whole other level.
Yeah, I know, but
because it's easy to be humble with your friends.
Yeah.
To serve a friend, maybe you can be grateful. But imagine you knew that this person is going to betray you mass and take his life. And yet and still, he cleaned his feet.
And he called them clean. I feel, he's such a teacher because, you definitely, he starts with love and then he says what he needs to say and he ends it with love because of his infinite love for us.
Love, humbleness, he serves, being God, made himself human for us, and it's just the perfect story, right? I mean, there's so many ways of living life. We can't say that we have figured it out. As you guys see in the episodes, we share things that God's done in our lives, but it's not to say that we haven't figured it out. All we know is that we met Jesus, and we know that he is the only one that was able to live a perfect life on this earth. So even though if we don't understand, we should obey him because we know that his desires for our lives are the best.
Yes, and the last verse that we read says, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Again, we may not understand it. It might look strange, right? But Jesus tells us what to do, and we will be blessed by it.
It's like with our kids, right? I mean, I'm learning so much with our children. The relationship between God, our creator, and us as his children, right? I mean, how many times we tell our kids, don't do this, and they're just wanting 7,000 explanations. It's like, we're telling you to do this. I can sit down and tell you 10 reasons why, but first of all, you're probably not going to understand why. Just know that if I told you to do this, it's for your well-being. So if we treat our children like that, imagine God.
Yes, and on that note, it says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So it shows that father-son relationship. Jesus knew that God had everything under control and that everything that was supposed to happen was going to happen.
For a reason. Thank you so much for joining in, guys. Listen, if you love this episode, please let us know what you thought in the comments, and we will see you on the next episode.